Hi, everyone. Not a big crowd, though. Sorry for running late. I'm actually sick after getting married on Friday, so it's good to be here anyway. Today I'm going to be talking about how Polkadot will scale dApps, which is something of a big change coming to this ecosystem of app chains, and something which is super important to go through in the featuring roadmap for the next, let's say, year and a half. So just a quick overview of Polkadot and what it was and what it is and what it will keep being, although this big change and upgrade. Polkadot is known to feature parachains or application dedicated chains. Parity, which is the company that mostly developed the infrastructure and tooling behind the ecosystem, has built Substrate or Polkadot SDK, which you can use to deploy a lot of chains, leverage the native protocols, and become a part of the ecosystem and leverage the security and the infrastructure which comes from the core protocols that developers built. Just beyond that, there are a few things which need to be went through. So the relay chain, which is a layer 0, which provides the security. Parachains, there are 40 plus of them, which are leveraging native protocols to become part of the ecosystem and share pretty much everything through XCM, which is the native cross-chain messaging protocol. Right now, there are around 40 plus parachains. However, anyone can use Polkadot SDK to develop its own custom chain or blockchain. And there are between 10 to 20 known and marketed and very well-grown chains which we talk to and kind of try to leverage their use cases to become parachains as well. So a few just kind of very, very basic comparisons on Polkadot chains and other chains which can be deployed through different SDKs or even L2s. Polkadot features security, high specialization, application-specific use cases, interoperability, shared consensus, low fees, and a centralized validator set. When it comes to other chains, specifically like L2s, obviously they rely on Ethereum's blob capacity, or settlement finality, and everything happens optimistically. They can't easily interoperate, meaning they need third-party integration, such most commonly bridges, which are, again, questionable in security. They need their own security and need their own validator set, which is, again, not the case for Polkadot chains. When people talk about Polkadot, sometimes, usually they kind of just ask whether if we're dead or not. Just a few highlights based on what has been happening in the ecosystem for the last few years. We brought Mythical Games, which was the largest gaming project on Ethereum. They launched their partnership with NFL and FIFA for the gaming on-chain games called FIFA Rivals and NFL Rivals. These days, Mythical actually holds the top 3 places in all NFT volume as well, because they have their Web2 NFT marketplace, which is specifically utilized through these games. Peak, Frequency, Origin Trail, and Euroweb, and Hydration as well are very, very active and commonly spoken about. Parachains, we can see the Frequency works with MiWi. They are also in talks with TikTok, which is tied to the US kind of happenings these days. And Hydration, which is a highly efficient DeFi, like all-in one-stop shop for DeFi, both like a money market and DeFi, which achieved more than 200 million TVL these days. Okay, so why hasn't Polkadot achieved success at greater scale? This is something I usually speak about, and kind of, first of all, the barrier to entry, the Polkadot ecosystem, to deploy a parachain and become a part of the ecosystem is actually was too high. We had something called crowd loans and parachain auctions. So the first parachain auction was like $50 million for a chain called Akala. The last one was around $50,000, which again, if we start with this hypothesis, it's just too expensive for a project which doesn't have a mature use case in this industry to pay for that price to become a parachain. although Polkadot is very resilient in its lower level protocols, we failed to look at a bigger picture to use these investments to get the services and application layer thriving. We weren't built as a part of Ethereum. We haven't forked Ethereum, which means that building everything from scratch, you can either focus on lower level protocols, the resilience, as we'd like to say it, or the more of the application or consumer layer. Obviously, we are non-EVM compatible, and we failed to look at those primitives to attract more application developers to come and build on Polkadot. We focused more on core chain protocol developers to deploy their chains, to leverage more of this blockchain infrastructure, and so on. We also failed to look at DeFi as the main building kind of primitive of a thriving ecosystem. And when you pair all of these together, obviously the non-EVM stuff was also blocking the core infrastructure providers such as custodians or centralized exchanges, and this specifically screwed us talking with Revolut, talking with Uniswap, talking with some other tier 1 projects which are kind of mostly accounting for the top performing KPIs in the wider industry. Again, as a part of DeFi, liquidity incentive, Ethereum bridges, all of this was underdeveloped as a part of the ecosystem. Next to that, my colleague and I at Parity, I think it was later in the second half of last year, we did the big market research project, and I guess the most important thing that you can be drawing from here is actually the image here, and that's what most of decision makers from CEOs and CTOs can actually, let's say, figure or score when it comes to choosing the blockchain infrastructure. So scalability or performance was the first one. The least adopted or the least wanted one was decentralization, which goes against the core blockchain kind of idea and primitives, but again, these days, I guess the scalability, the high TPS, low latency, they account for big and significant UX, which is something that again is super, super important for project choosing their blockchain. Then DevX, ecosystem growth or activity in the number of users and so on. Unfortunately, security comes forth. No one thinks about it until there is a Black Swan event. So something that also highly contributes to Polkadot's new roadmap is something we've seen through a spamming kind of use case or experiment, and something we managed to do as an ecosystem, not Parity, not Web3 Foundation solely. This was a big ecosystem effort. We managed to get Kusama, which is the Polkadot sister or canary network, to achieve 144,000 transactions per second. So this legacy Polkadot infrastructure and protocols are proven to get the huge results in the market. And there are three things or three updates which are proving for that. First of all, we switched from the crowd loans and the auctions to something which is called core time. Essentially, what you can be doing is just renting one core per month, which is similar to AWS's spot instances instead of reserved instances for the majority of the next 2 years or 3 years. Meaning you can pay per usage for the block space that you use, and the price for that is between 100 and 1,000 DOT. Which at this point in time is between $400 and $4,000. So that means that if you take into account engineering costs, etc., we actually 100x'd, lowered down the price to deploy and run a chain by 100 times on average, which makes the entry barrier much, much lower. When it comes to achieving those high scalability numbers, the elastic scaling is something, maybe some of you know, the term parallel processing, which is the kind of splitting the execution into multiple processor or units, meaning that not one parachain does not need to run on one core specifically, but they can have multiple cores assigned to their parachain and split the execution, meaning also lowering down block times and having this larger throughput. Just a quick overview and maybe this flow that Philip mentioned, and kind of these were the results of the market research project which has been done in the last year. obviously some of the trade-offs in using Polkadot, high entry barrier, resilient in its lower level protocols, but failed to look at a bigger picture to attract more application developers, failed to look at DeFi as the foundational piece for building a thriving ecosystem. Again, paired with the general market research stuff, we did come to a conclusion that Polkadot is not where it's supposed to be. How do we plan to change that? How do we plan to improve? How do we plan to position better in the next years? Obviously, like I mentioned already, the spamming effect and something that is a part of the Polkadot roadmap, which is called Polkadot 2.0, asynchronous backing, lowering down the block times, core time, agile core time, which is pay per usage, monthly block space, spot instances, and elastic scaling, which is parallel computing or parallel processing. This has already proven to be working, with Kusama achieving more than 130,000 transactions per second on a live network. The second portion of the improvement is actually switching from the chain deployment first thesis and getting back on the application thesis. This is, by the way, the different route that Polygon and Optimism, for example, took, and Avalanche, because first they had the application layer, they had C chains and application blockchains, single ones which are Ethereum layer 2s, and eventually they showed something in the industry or introduced the industry with different chain deployment kits or creating subnets, creating ZK-based chains or other infrastructure which are running in parallel to their chain. Now we're doing the vice versa, which is a little bit bad from the go-to-market perspective, and you'll see why. But what we are doing is we are taking one of the system parachains in Polkadot, and we are adding a new layer of new application layer, which is featuring two main points. One is Polka VM or PVM, which essentially has the Solidity compiler. And the second part is the Ethereum JSON RPC, which sits on top of the substrate node, meaning that Polkadot will get its native Ethereum compatibility finally. All the integrations, all the tooling, everything when it comes to DevX will be on Polkadot natively, not through third-party chains, not through new third-party infrastructure providers or something like this. It's going to be native on Polkadot L1. It's very important to mention it's not EVM, it's PVM or Polka VM, which has a different bytecode and so on. And the team at Parity is doing their best to feature the maximum Ethereum compatibility. It's super important to mention it's one of the Polkadot native chains, which everything before I've mentioned from the spamming effect, Kusama, and so on will be inherited as well. You can see that there are a lot of different chains as a part of the Polkadot ecosystem. Polkadot Hub is one of the chains which will be designed for dApps, meaning Uniswaps of this world, meaning Aves of this world, meaning all other dApps who wishes to deploy natively on Polkadot. Something that we are assuming we will be achieving here, obviously, is the easier integration with infrastructure providers and compelling pitch to these tier 1 and tier 2 dApps. With that, we aim to rebuild a thriving application ecosystem and create the abundance of non-technical KPIs or ecosystem development perks which will attract the larger user base to come to Polkadot. And this is the foundational piece to scaling from there and offering them our chain deployment services. Maybe something very, very interesting to mention is that there are a lot of opinions about how there are a lot of L2s. And now with the Polkadot Hub mentioned, what we aim to do, catching up, is just the L2 copy pasta success. And it's the reality. We are trying to achieve the maximum Ethereum compatibility, and we're talking to mainstream tier 1 applications from Uniswap, Aave to others to make sure that foundational metrics such as TVL, volume, and so on are being satisfied. So we can then, from there, scale, because in order to overcome, we first need to be able to compete. I think that at this point in time, Avalanche has 1.1 billion TVL. We have 250 million TVL. That's 4 or 5 times less than Avalanche. It's just sad. We have to go through this, again, copy pasta L2 success route, see the mainstream deployments that we can gather with this and build our use cases to get the unique value props. The unique value props is something that comes mostly through PVM or this Polka VM. So the smart contracts deployed in Solidity and executing on PVM can run 10 times faster, 10 to 100 times faster than EVM. It means between 450,000 state reads per second. Also, super important thing to mention, PVM is based on RISC-V. And if you've been following Vitalik's work for the last few, let's say, months since the chaos, communism and so on, you actually could see that he proposed for Ethereum to go back to being the execution unit for as an L1 chain and feature a RISC-V machine. This is exactly what Polkadot is doing for 2 years now. And in this case, like I mentioned, these are the benchmarks which have been proven on Polkadot, and something that is coming once we caught up with all the Uniswaps and custodians and all the Ethereum fancy stuff that we missed out, the bridges and so on in the last few years. Again, a few of the benchmarks which we have proven here is that also apart from the higher performance or more faster contracts, the higher computation power is also included, meaning that high resources calculations that specifically go on-chain or specific infrastructure that needs to be built in a centralized and insecure off-chain way can now be called directly from smart contracts. This is something which also has a native, that has a more of a step to a native and true blockchain Web3 kind of holistic approach to it as well, apart from the business-wide perspectives of like running a very heavy ZK-based instances and something that a lot of ZK projects are fighting with. Actually, we can see that ZK Syncs of this world, risk zeros of this world and so on have already been trying to settle this resources into calling these functionalities directly from contracts. Again, something that Polkadot will be able to achieve from the 4th quarter of this year once Polkadot Hub is actually there. Obviously, from there, we can explore use cases. There is a Polkadot hackathon right now where you can even test a lot of these things, interact with PVM, with Solidity smart contracts, with Ethereum tooling, but also tap into something that is unique, the native cross-chain messaging protocol. We have 40+ chains already deployed as a part of the Polkadot ecosystem, meaning that if you now run a contract on Hub, you can also call the functionalities of either of those 40+ different rollups or parachains which exist in the Polkadot ecosystem. And also, like I mentioned, if you run a dApp yourself, if you want to deploy a DEX, we'll be super happy to support you, explore the unique use cases, and once you attract enough users, you can obviously have the natural path to scale from a dApp onto a parachain. To kind of cover it up, Polkadot started as a parachain only, the chain deployment first thesis. We were not Ethereum compatible. We built opposite to Ethereum. Now we are circling the whole value offering, getting a compelling Ethereum compatible smart contract roadmap to deploy your dApp and have the natural path to scale towards the parachain. That's it. I'm sorry that I actually screwed up with the time here. I prolonged this presentation a little bit. There's a lot of funding initiatives. There's a lot of good incentives that you guys can also be a part of. If you want to build your first app on Polkadot, like I mentioned, there's a hackathon out there right now. By the way, I spent 2 years at Parity before joining Web3 Foundation a few months ago, so I'm very deeply integrated within the tech teams, which also gives me a little bit of leverage in making sure that we're bringing the right market data into the core engineering workforces and power, building out this Ethereum compatibility and smart contracts in Polkadot. So yeah, I can wrap it up here, but if there are any questions, I can see more people now than opposed to when we started.
Let's start with a big applause. Okay, so we can start with questions. We have time. I see one hand in the back.
Yep.
Oops. Hello, my name is Dennis, and we are actually running the hackathon for Polkadot Ethereum-compatible smart contracts in RISC-V compatible Polka VM, and we invite everyone to hack on our tracks. Could you, Alex, be a little bit more specific about your perspective on these tracks?
Can you repeat the question? What are my expectations from the track?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and hey, Dennis. So just maybe the most important thing to mention and highlight here is you guys saw and heard the roadmap of us trying to just figure out our way into filling the gaps, which what we're building right now, the very basic implementation or the use case for it is something that L2s have seen for quite a while. Hence, when it comes to core business-wise or sales-wise go-to-market strategy, we want popular code bases deployed in Polkadot. Most of those are open source. Like, go ahead and try them yourself. We are building something which is maybe more similar to, say, for example, as Ethereum compatibility and this splitting of different infrastructure rather than an L2, but which means that you can actually test and tweak and tinker with a lot of different things, which at the end of the day means that all of those popular code bases which are open source can be now contributed and kind of developed on Polkadot as well. So my expectation would revolve around A, seeing what's not Ethereum compatible, since we don't have the same bytecode as EVM. B, some of the tooling that we might need. There's always a good learning curve when it comes to what oracles do you prefer, Chainlink, Redstone, Pyth, something Forth, Supra. Then Block Explorer, do you need the contract verification tool? How? What do you use for debugging? What do you use for this and that? From the tooling perspective to, again, playing around, tinkering with these code bases and so on, I really, really, really hope that we can get a significant learning curve and kind of feedback from smart contract developers on meeting that almost native Ethereum compatibility and how some of the most popular open source code bases can actually work.
Any more questions, maybe? Okay, then let's. I see hand there, yeah.
Yeah, hi, my name is Steven. I'm involved in Polkadot for a while. So from my point of view, the two main problems of Polkadot is lack of users and lack of liquidity. How are you going to solve this?
Good questions. First of all, the liquidity with the core Ethereum compatible infrastructure, which now will be kind of easier to integrate. When it comes to liquidity, what provides liquidity? First, it's the, well, let's assume it's in this order. First, the applications, and then the infrastructure. We've battled the fight with Fireblocks for quite a while. They did not want to integrate Ethereum, non-EVM chain for quite some time. Fireblocks screwed us with the Revolut, which was bound to provide more than 200 million in stablecoin issuance. That's 200 million liquidity. That's fucked up. We couldn't provide it because we had to negotiate or invest a huge amount of money for Fireblocks, which didn't want to talk to us because we were non-EVM. So in this case, the Ethereum compatibility, which I'm talking about, is built as a hypothesis to solve a lot of these issues, because when people hear that we're Ethereum compatible and we have the tech glove or tech white glove support service to help them integrate, we can also invest now in all the right projects, which are the source of that liquidity. When it comes to users, it really depends on who we're talking about. Do we talk about devs? Do we talk about normies who are using, I don't know, if we take a look at Mythical, they have a bunch of users nowadays when it comes to the gamers which are playing their FIFA rivals, NFL rivals, and so on. If we talk about frequency, if we talk about the majority of those normies which I mentioned. But I assume that users are mostly the core native Web3 users, which are doing the swaps, which are bridging, which are doing this and that in the core Web3 principles. We will solve this by reconsidering DeFi as the foundational piece to it. One big project to that is hydration. But again, with the Polkadot Hub, we'll get much more, not just something which is centralized on one infrastructure and one chain in that case, and we will make sure that we are interrupting those projects in the right way to kind of, get the most out of the application first infrastructure instead of just the different chains which are, bound to make success by themselves or even compete at sometimes. Does it help, the answer?
Okay, any more questions? Let's give a big applause to Alex.